You're scrolling on your phone after dinner, half watching the news when you see it. Donald Trump standing at a White House podium on a hot August afternoon in 2026, smiling as he says Kim Jong-un has finally answered his calls. I know him, he knows me. We get along great. Then, almost in the same breath, he announces a massive cut to joint military drills with South Korea. Why? Because, in his words, the exercises are a hostile signal to a man he calls a friend, and you pause because something feels off. A superpower is drowning in the Middle East. 60 days of failed negotiations with Iran, threats to bomb Oman, an aircraft carrier that hasn't docked in 260 days, and a president who reportedly switched planes in July just to avoid a food truck. Yet here he is, turning to a traditional enemy with a warm smile and an open hand. 7 years ago, Trump walked out of Hanoi empty-handed. North Korea's nuclear arsenal didn't shrink, it grew. So this isn't diplomacy. This is a man driving through a desert with an empty tank, circling back to the guy who sold him a fake map. But don't rush to judge Washington just yet, because another superpower is doing the exact same thing. Beijing has been feeding Pyongyang for decades, fuel, food, silence, and asking almost nothing in return. Why would two rival empires suddenly compete to please the same small nuclear-armed restaurant owner who never pays his tab? That's the question that should worry you, no matter where you live, because here's what nobody on your feed is saying. The whole world is watching this courtship, and the lesson is getting louder every day. Acting crazy pays better than acting civilized. And if that becomes the rule of the global table, you won't be a guest anymore. You'll be on the menu. So before we go any further, we're going to answer 3 questions. What did China give up to keep North Korea happy? What does North Korea's success actually look like from the inside? And what happens when every dictator learns that the surest way to get fed is to threaten to burn the restaurant down? So before we judge the American president too fast, let's look at the other giant in the room. Because Beijing has been playing this game longer than Trump has. Let's say you're watching your neighbor feed a stray dog. Every morning you see him set out a bowl of rice and meat. Yet every evening he stands on his porch and shouts about how dangerous the dog is. You'd think he's confused or maybe lying. But what if I told you that's exactly what China has been doing with North Korea for over a decade? And in 2026, the feeding got louder, the shouting got softer, and the dog got fatter. Here's the scene, June 2026. Xi Jinping flies to Pyongyang for the first time in 7 years. His only foreign trip all year. Not Washington, not Brussels, not Moscow, Pyongyang. Think about that for a second. The leader of the world's second-largest economy clears his entire calendar to sit with Kim Jong-un. Why now? Because the dog started eating from someone else's bowl. The numbers are uncomfortable if you still believe the sanctions story. China-North Korea trade has quietly climbed back above $27 billion. North Korea's economy has grown more than 3% for 3 straight years. That growth isn't magic. It's diesel from Chinese refineries, fertilizer from Chinese factories, grain from Chinese ports, and machinery that keeps Pyongyang's missile assembly lines humming. You don't get 3% growth in a sanctions cage unless someone is holding the door open. But here's the twist that should make you angry, not at one country, but at the whole game. China votes for every UN sanctions resolution against North Korea. Every single one. 6 nuclear tests, 6 rounds of sanctions, 6 Chinese yes votes. Yet the trade keeps flowing. Oil keeps moving. Ports stay busy. How? Because sanctions are the public performance, and trade is the private handshake. One for the cameras in New York, one for the trucks at Dandong. They've been running both tracks simultaneously for years, and honestly, the only surprise is that anyone still acts shocked. Why does Beijing do it? 2 reasons, and neither is about loving Kim. First, China cannot afford to collapse North Korea. Imagine your neighbor's house catches fire and 30 million desperate people run toward your door. That's the nightmare scenario. Refugees, U.S. troops at the Yalu River, a unified Korea allied with Washington. So China feeds the dog to keep it in the yard, not because it likes the dog. Second, China cannot control the dog. 6 nuclear tests proved that. Beijing voted for sanctions after every test, and Pyongyang ignored every vote. You can't starve a regime that knows you'll never let it starve. Now watch what Kim did with that leverage. When Trump and Kim's love affair collapsed in 2019, Xi stayed away. For 6 years, 2019 to 2025, Xi refused to meet Kim. Cold shoulder, no summit, no state visit. But the moment North Korea started sending artillery shells and soldiers to fight alongside Russia in Ukraine, everything changed. Suddenly, Xi was on a plane to Pyongyang. Twice in 2026 alone, because the dog found a second bowl, and Beijing panicked at the thought of Moscow owning the leash. So here's the small climax you need to sit with for a second. Russia has tied North Korea to its war machine. China is feeding North Korea's economy with both hands. America is now trying to reopen dialogue with Pyongyang. 3 great powers, 3 different methods. 1 shared destination, courting Kim Jong-un. The sanctions are theater. The trade is real. The diplomacy is a bidding war. And you, sitting in your kitchen reading the news, are supposed to believe any of them care about the North Korean people eating grass while their leader imports Swiss cheese. Because that's the real question nobody in Washington, Beijing, or Moscow wants to ask. If China's trade is keeping North Korea alive, and Russia's weapons deals are keeping North Korea relevant, and America's outreach is keeping North Korea legitimized, then who exactly is left to pressure the one man holding 26 million people hostage? The answer might be more uncomfortable than the feeding itself. Let's say you walk into a restaurant where the menu has exactly 1 item, and it's been out of stock since before you were born. The kitchen is dark. The waiters are thin. The customers stopped complaining years ago because complaining costs calories. And outside, 2 of the wealthiest men on earth are shoving each other to hold the door open for you, each one shouting that he's the better friend. You'd think you'd won something. But look closer. The chef has hidden every knife. The cash register is welded shut, and the owner is outside taking selfies with both billionaires while you sit at an empty table. That's North Korea in August 2026, and you need to understand this before you make any judgment about the headlines, because the headlines are lying to you by omission. Here's the paradox that should make you stop scrolling. North Korea has never been more successful on the world stage, not in its entire history. Washington sends envoys, Beijing sends grain, Moscow sends fighter jet parts and pays cash for artillery shells. 3 of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council are now competing for Pyongyang's attention. Yet inside that restaurant, the currency lost half its value in a single year. The price of rice jumped 68% in official markets, and in the back alley stalls where people actually buy food, some prices tripled. You can't eat diplomatic recognition. You can't feed a child a war dividend of $220 million when that money is already promised to missile factories and forced labor camps. 25 million people live in that restaurant, and the owner just ordered more chandeliers. So what does success actually mean when you're the most courted country on earth? Think of it like a casino where the house always wins. Except the house is one family, and the chips are other people's hunger. The regime has discovered that you don't need to grow food. You don't need to fix the power grid. You don't need to open a single factory for consumer goods. You just need to look dangerous enough that powerful strangers keep offering you tribute to stay calm. Every nuclear test is a marketing campaign. Every missile launch is a press release. And every time a foreign leader smiles and shakes hands, the menu gets smaller. Because the more afraid the world is, the less the people inside matter to anyone with real power. Now, here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. America's current posture, Trump's unthreatening language, his talk of a very good relationship, his quiet reduction of joint military exercises is not diplomacy. It's a signal. And every small country on earth is watching that signal the way a teenager watches a rich kid get away with shoplifting. The lesson is brutally clear. You don't need to make your citizens' lives better. You don't need elections, hospitals, or even working toilets. You need to make the big players afraid of you. That's it. That's the whole playbook. And Washington is currently teaching that playbook to every dictator with a basement full of centrifuges. But wait, isn't Beijing also feeding this monster? Of course it is. China props up the Kim regime with oil, fertilizer, and diplomatic cover, not because Beijing loves the dynasty, but because a collapsed North Korea would send millions of refugees across the Yalu River and put American troops on China's border. That's not kindness. That's a landlord paying a crackhead to stay inside the apartment so the building doesn't burn down. And Russia? Russia is the guy who shows up at the back door with a truck full of cash and asks, "How many shells can you load by Friday?" The war in Ukraine turned Pyongyang into a munitions factory with a flag. So now you have 3 superpowers, all with different reasons, all feeding the same beast. And none of them asking what the beast eats at home. Let that sink in for a second. The international community doesn't see 25 million living, breathing human beings. It sees a bargaining chip, a threat to be managed, a client state to be rented. When Trump says he gets along great with Kim, he's not talking about the woman in Chongjin who sold her hair to buy cornmeal. When she sends a delegation, he's not thinking about the fisherman who hasn't seen his son in 4 years because the son was sent to a construction site in Siberia to earn foreign currency for the state. And when Putin signs another arms deal, he's not picturing the farmer whose harvest was confiscated to feed soldiers who will never fight a war on Korean soil. They all see a chess piece. You and I are the only ones imagining the chess piece has a family. So here's the ugly truth. The one that doesn't fit in a cable news chyron. North Korea's international success and its domestic misery are not opposites. They're the same thing, seen from different sides of the barbed wire. The nuclear program doesn't exist despite the hunger. It exists because of the hunger. The regime has learned that a starving population is actually an asset. It proves you'll do anything, that you have nothing to lose, that you can't be bribed with trade deals because your people are already too broken to expect anything. You know what a desperate man with a gun can negotiate? Everything. You know what a well-fed man with a mortgage can negotiate? Nothing. That's why the restaurant stays empty. The owner likes it that way. And that's the question nobody in Washington, Beijing, or Moscow is asking. What happens when the most courted country on earth is also the most hollowed out? What happens when the bidding war ends and the winner realizes he's bought a haunted house? Because you can't build an alliance on fear forever. You can't eat a handshake. And you can't keep 25 million people locked in a dark kitchen while you pose for photos with billionaires, not without something eventually breaking. The only question is whether it breaks outward into war or inward, into collapse. And neither answer is on the menu. Let's say you're standing in a grocery store waiting in line with your basket. The guy in front of you cuts the line, grabs a handful of candy, and starts shouting at the cashier. Security comes over, not to drag him out, but to apologize and give him the candy for free. You'd be furious, right? You'd think, why do I even bother following the rules? That exact feeling is now running through the minds of every mid-sized power watching North Korea, because the showroom is open for business, and the display case is a nuclear warhead. Here's the signal Pyongyang just sent to the whole world. Nuclear blackmail works. Not winning wars, not invading anyone, not building a functioning economy. Just testing bombs, launching missiles over your neighbor's roof, threatening to turn cities into glass, and sending a few thousand troops to Ukraine to learn real combat tactics. That's it. And what did North Korea get in return? Reduced military exercises on its border, loosened sanctions pressure, a handshake from an American president, continued trade with China, and fresh weapons tech from Russia. You don't need to be a geopolitical genius to see the math here. Think of it like feeding a bankrupt gambler at a casino table. You slide him chips because he's loud, unstable, and holding a knife. But he doesn't thank you, he doubles the bet. Every concession you make makes his next threat more expensive for you to ignore. That's the core lesson of the showroom. The value of a nuclear weapon doesn't come from using it. It comes from convincing everyone you might. And the more the world pays to keep you calm, the higher the price goes next time. But here's where it gets dangerous for you, even if you've never thought about Pyongyang for more than 5 minutes. Iran is watching, not casually, obsessively. Tehran saw a country with a broken economy, a starving population, and zero soft power get treated like a serious player simply because it was crazy enough and loud enough. Why would Iran's nuclear program ever stop now? They've seen the return on investment. You build a bomb, you act unhinged, and suddenly Washington stops lecturing you about human rights and starts scheduling photo ops. That's not a deterrent. That's a business model. For decades, the implicit deal of the international order was simple. Behave well, develop your economy, follow the rules, and you'll live a decent life. China did it. South Korea did it. Vietnam did it. But North Korea just proved there's a shortcut. You don't need to make your people prosperous. You don't need to win friends. You just need to make the big powers afraid of you. And once that shortcut is proven, every ambitious autocrat with a uranium deposit starts wondering why they're wasting time on boring things like schools and hospitals. This is the quiet tragedy of the showroom. It's not just that one rogue state, got a better deal than it deserved. It's that the rules of the game just shifted. The civilized path, patience, trade, diplomacy, gradual reform, now looks slow and expensive. The madman's path, a bomb, a threat, a staged provocation, looks fast and profitable. You're watching history move backward, from a world that rewarded reason to a world that rewards recklessness. And the worst part, nobody in Washington, Beijing, or Moscow is trying to close the showroom. They're all too busy negotiating with the mannequin. So here's the question you should be asking yourself, because it's no longer hypothetical. If you were a mid-sized country with a struggling economy, and a neighbor who hates you, which path would you choose? The one that takes 30 years and gets you a trade deal, or the one that takes 5 years and gets you a nuclear umbrella? The showroom isn't just displaying weapons. It's displaying a strategy. And unless someone changes the price tag, you're going to see a lot more customers walking through the door. So let's talk about the bill. Not the one with the flags and the photo ops and the summit handshakes. I mean the actual dinner bill, the one that gets slid across the table when the cameras are off and the translators have gone home. Because somebody always pays. And if you're sitting at home watching this, maybe thinking it's all just distant theater, here's the part nobody wants to put on a teleprompter. You're already at the table, whether you ordered anything or not. Let's say you're a diner in Pyongyang, not the kind in the propaganda posters, but a real person. Your kitchen has been empty since the 1990s. Your shoes are held together with wire, and your only job options are a coal mine, a construction site, or a military barracks with no heat. Now imagine the owner of the restaurant, Kim Jong-un, suddenly gets invited to every exclusive supper club on Earth. Washington flies him to Singapore, Beijing pours him baijiu, Moscow sends him horses, and you're still eating boiled grass. The bill for his new international status doesn't come in dollars. It comes in hunger, forced labor at the Musin mine, and a total absence of any exit. You pay with your body every single day so he can sit at the grown-ups table. Now shift seats. You're a diner in Seoul and you've been a loyal customer for 70 years. You paid for a security guarantee that felt like a fixed-price menu. America watches your back. You host their bases, everyone eats well. Then one morning you wake up and the chef has canceled the joint exercises. Not because the threat is gone, but because the owner of the restaurant thinks he can charm the arsonist next door with a letter. That hurts. In a Gallup Korea poll from this year, 46.4% of South Koreans now say they distrust the United States, while 45.4% still trust it. The first time distrust has led since 2017. Favorability toward America collapsed from 72.8% to 47.5% in a single year. That's not a polling error. That's 70 years of loyalty being handed a receipt that says your safety is now a personal favor, not a contract. But you're not Korean, are you? So let's bring you to the table. Say you live in Phoenix or Rotterdam or Melbourne. You don't think you ordered anything from this menu. Yet you're paying for the mess in the Strait of Hormuz because the same man who calls North Korea's leader a very smart guy also ripped up the Iran deal and then wondered why the region caught fire. You're paying for a beautiful relationship with a regime that still tests missiles over Japan while your president brags about the size of his letters. And you're paying with something even harder to replace than money. The rules that used to keep the dining room from becoming a knife fight. When the big powers start treating security like a private club membership, the first thing to go is the menu. The second is the maitre d'. The third is you, wondering why your table got cleared while you were still eating. Here's the pattern nobody at the top wants you to notice. Trump cares about the deal, the signing ceremony, the ratings, the I fixed it line. Kim cares about the nukes, the one thing that keeps him from being another Gaddafi. She cares about the buffer, a broken, starving, radioactive North Korea that keeps American troops far from his border. Putin cares about the war. Every shipment of North Korean artillery shells means fewer Russian conscripts in body bags. 4 men, 4 obsessions. And not one of them is looking at the bowl of rice. Not the bowl in Pyongyang, not the bowl in Seoul, not the bowl in your city. Honestly, it's like watching 4 landlords argue about property values while the tenants are eating wallpaper. This is what I call the ruler's logic versus the diner's logic. The ruler asks, how do I keep my seat, my legacy, my leverage? The diner asks, is there food? Is it safe? Can I afford it tomorrow? On the big power chessboard, you and the Korean miner and the Seoul office worker are all the same piece. A pawn that can be traded, sacrificed, or forgotten. Kim trades your hunger for a summit photo. Trump trades your alliance trust for a very good relationship. Xi trades your regional stability for a buffer zone. And they all call it strategy, because strategy sounds better than somebody else's kids go hungry. So here's the small, sharp truth I need you to sit with for a second. Nobody at the top is talking about the people. Not one of them. The bill is being split 4 ways, and every single line item, the sanctions relief, the missile tests, the canceled drills, the arms shipments, gets charged to a different diner who never saw the menu. The North Korean pays in hunger, the South Korean in broken trust, the American in wasted leverage, and you in the slow erosion of an order you didn't know you depended on. And when the waiter finally brings the check, don't expect any of those 4 men to reach for their wallets. They've already left through the kitchen. So who actually wins when everyone is courting the same crazy neighbor? Let's say you're back in that restaurant from the beginning. The kitchen's still empty, the shelves still bare, the customer's still hungry. But now the manager has a new trick. He walks outside, waves a match over a gas can, and suddenly every powerful diner on the street is shoving cash through the window. Not to feed anyone, just to keep the fire from spreading. That's the Trump playbook with Kim Jong-un, and it's the same one he's now reading in Tehran. You remember the line from the first chapter. Trump said Kim responded to his dialogue offer because I get along with him. 7 years ago, almost to the day, the same script played out at the DMZ. Handshakes, photo ops, talk of denuclearization. The result? A nuclear arsenal that's bigger, more tested, more mobile. Yet here's the twist. The dangerous part isn't the lie. It's that the lie keeps working, because the world has changed around that lie. North Korea isn't just a hermit with bombs anymore. It has soldiers who've seen real combat, supply lines backed by Moscow, a patron in Beijing that never lets it collapse. And every small country watching this is doing the same math you do at a poker table, where one player keeps winning by flipping the table over. The lesson isn't, don't flip tables. The lesson is, flip first. That's the reverse gear. We're not moving toward a world where reason wins. We're backing into a world where the craziest actor at the table gets the most free drinks. And the 25 million people inside North Korea? They're not at the table. They're under it, holding empty bowls. You'll hear words like alliance, relationship, deal. Remember this. Not one of those words was ever spoken by someone holding a rice bowl.